Be sure to turn this thing on. All right, there we go.
Right, so we're going to be in Psalms 4. And don't stand just yet. I will have you stand later. So, something that really stood out to me at camp was something Pastor Gaddis said. There's a lot of good preaching and everything there. There's something that really stood out to me. What he says, he said, every time you preach, you always have butterflies. Yeah. You pray that the butterflies fly in the right direction, all in the same direction, so you actually get somewhere. So I'll be praying that right before I get into the message. Anyways, I was told that I have a time frame to preach in, so I'm going to do my best to preach in that time frame. We'll see how that works. Anyways, I want you to stand with me as we read Psalms 4. We're going to read all the way through, and then I'll have you be seated. I'll pray, and then I'll have you be seated. So let's read. Hear me when I call, O God, of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. O ye sons of men, how long will ye turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing, Selah? But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still, Selah. Offer the sacrifice of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There be many that say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of thy countenance upon us. Thou hast put gladness in my heart more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makes me dwell in safety. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day. And it's been a wonderful day so far, dear God. I thank you for the freedom that we still have in this country to come and worship you in your church, dear God. And I pray for this whole COVID thing. And I know that it's putting a dampener on our fellowship, dear God. And I pray that it be over soon, dear God. Amen. That we would be able to get back to fellowshipping and encouraging each other in you, dear God. At any rate, I pray for the sermon. I pray that you remove me out of the way, that you wouldn't calm my nerves, but use me as a vessel, dear God. I don't want to be the one preaching. I want the Holy Ghost to be the one preaching, dear God. So remove anything out of the way from me, dear God. Please calm my nerves and help me to say exactly what you would have me to say. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you may be seated. So I'm going to try. I like to move around a little bit. I'll try to give you a little bit of space here. Most likely when we stay to the right side. Anyways, so it starts off, this is to the chief musician at Neginoth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that the right way, but it's a Psalm of David, right? And so I first wanted to see why that was even said, right? And it appears that the word Neginoth is actually stringed instruments, right? And it was a group that would actually play, not a band, but it was a section of just stringed instruments that play in the temple, right? And so what he's really saying is the chief musician that's kind of orchestrating these stringed instruments. You're supposed to sing this in the temple. You're supposed to play and sing it. And there's two reasons why you really sing songs. And the main reason is towards God. God is the main audience when we sing songs. So I would like to encourage you that when you do sing songs, make sure that you're singing to God. This is not the whole part of the message. It's really just something on the side I wanted to point out. But when we sing songs, yeah, we're singing to glorify God. But there's something else that happens. And when we sing songs, it affects people that hear it. And so it's able to encourage people. And that's why we really got to be careful about our message. And very careful that we're not leading people straight in the songs. Make sure it's right. And so David's saying, okay, you're going to be playing this in the temple. And yes, you're going to be singing it to God, you're going to be glorifying God, but it is going to have effect on the people that hear it. Right? And so I hope you'll allow me to have some liberty with my imagination. Right? We see throughout Psalms are primarily written by David, and a lot of times he writes them to the musicians. Sometimes they're just Psalms written throughout his life, right? And so, but this particular one, it is written for the people in the temple and for God. And he first starts off asking the Lord. It's kind of in a prayer form. He asks the Lord to hear him when he prays. And what we see next is that he says something that the Lord has done for him. Right? It's in verse 1. He says, "Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress." And something we heard up at camp that really kind of stuck in my mind is when they placed the 12 stones by the river. It was a monument that would, every time they passed by and see it, it would tell them something that the Lord had done for them. It's what David does when he first starts out this song. He says something that the Lord has done for him. And this kind of sets the stage of what he's going to go through throughout the song. Right? And so let me take my liberty with this a little bit with imagination. And we see him writing songs throughout his life. So I can imagine maybe him on his bed. Maybe he's looking out the window, looking at the stars. He can't fall asleep. And so maybe he has something heavy upon his heart, maybe something on his mind that he just has to get off. Right? And it's a part of Scripture, so we know it's inspired by God. Right? He is the penman, yes, but God is the author. So maybe God is just impressing this upon his heart. So maybe he gets out of his bed. And he goes and he finds something to write with, and he starts writing it down. He first starts off with, "Thou hast enlarged me in my distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer." And then he goes into, "O ye sons of men, how long we turn my glory into shame." And so I really wanted to know what the glory he was talking about. So I looked it up a little bit, and there's really no particular thing that we can put our thumb on as this is it. But we can't speculate. We know that David glorified himself in God. He glorified himself in worshiping God. So we could say that it was the sons of men turning the worship of God into shame. We can't say that for sure. It could be something else. Some commentators have said that it was his kingdom that they were messing with. Right? A kingdom would be kind of the glory of a king, you might say. Maybe they're messing with his kingdom and doing something to cause shame on it. It might be his name. You know, Absalom was not the best son, and he caused hurt to David's name. So it could be multiple things that we can't say put our thumb on, but we do know that there is a problem there. They're turning the glory into shame. And then what follows right after that is, "How long will you love vanity and seek after leasing?" And so the vanity is just the emptiness. Okay, we know Solomon, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What that just means is it's emptiness, it's worthlessness. And then leasing is falsehoods or lies. So what he's saying is they're turning the glory into shame, and they're going after falsehoods and emptiness. Lies and emptiness and lies. How long are you going to go after that, right? And so we're not quite sure if he's literally going after to say, "Hey, you're in the wrong, get right now," or if he's writing this to help people. "Hey, you are in the wrong. How long are you going to go after that? Are you going to change?" Right? So we see the problem, and we see that it's most likely due to the vanity and the lies that they're seeking after. Right? Just lost my place. And then he says, "But know that the Lord has set apart him that is godly for himself." And we as Christians, we kind of already know that the Lord does set aside those that are godly for him, those that are trying to serve him, right, for himself. But it's kind of a transition. He goes from "you're doing wrong," and then, "but the Lord will set," or the Lord has set aside those that are godly for him. And then he goes right straight from that to, "The Lord will hear me," or "the Lord..." My tongue got to work. All right. So he says, "The Lord will hear when I call unto him." The Lord has set godly men for himself, and he will hear when I call unto him. It's kind of a statement. I don't think David's being self-righteous. I don't think he's being proud. We know that David was called a man after God's own heart. And I mean, yes, we all struggle with pride, but I really don't think he's boasting. Other than in the Lord, he's not boasting in himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. And so that kind of, okay. Well, why will he do that? Well, what he said before. Because he does set the godly aside for himself. Right? And so we see this problem that David has on his mind that he's trying to address. We may not know what it is, but we do know that it is a problem. And it's emptiness in lives. And then he says, okay, you got to be careful because God does set the godly man aside. He will hear my prayer. And then it says, stand in awe and sin not. Now to stand in awe is very much of, it carries like a quaking emotion, almost like fear and reverence. And then he says, turns around and says, and sin not. Now, I don't think he's really saying to really just tremble in fear, but it does give a sense that if the Lord sets the godly aside for himself, then something's going to happen to the wicked, right? And you do need to stand in awe and sin not. He's addressing the problem in a sense. Whether it's the worship of God, the problem could be idolatry. You might see idolatry in the land, and he's addressing it as you're turning my glory in worshiping God into idolatry, and you really just need to stand in awe of God and not sin. You need to give up those idols, right? It could be the kingdom, and you have people sinning in the kingdom, and it's damaging the kingdom, and he's saying, still you stand in awe of God and sin not. So something's happening, and there's a problem right there in his ways. What he's telling them, in very simple terms, don't do bad. I know that's really simple, but that's literally what he's saying. Don't sin. Right? But then he goes on, right? And in verse 5 he says, offer the sacrifice of the righteous and put your trust in the Lord. And so as you're following kind of his thought process, he says there's a problem that I'm addressing that's happening, and you need to make sure you're right with God. He may not be fully calling them out of sin, but he's saying, don't do wickedly and make sure you're right with God. A sacrifice of the righteous. Now, or of righteousness, I should say. And there's, to my research, I can't find a particular sacrifice that's called the sacrifice of righteousness, per se, but it kind of carries the meaning of sacrificing yourself for righteousness. You're offering kind of like a righteous offering. A righteous sacrifice. And when you're looking at, there's a problem, you're not supposed to sin. Right? Make sure you're not doing wrong. That's probably the most simple I can boil it down to, whether they are doing sin, they're living in sin, or whether he's just addressing a problem. Make sure that you're standing in reverence to God and you're not sinning. But make sure that you are doing something for God. Make sure that... There's a concept out there that when you replace or when you get rid of something that's bad, you replace it with something that's good. Right? So we do have a problem he's addressing. I'm going to go over this probably many times. I have the problem of just repeating myself. But there's a problem he's addressing. You need to make sure that you're not doing wrong. Whether you're doing wrong right now, or whether there's a possibility, just make sure that you're not going contrary to God. And then he gives the idea of replace it with a righteous sacrifice. And so, but then I do have to say, I have skipped something as far as when he tells them to stand in awe and sin not. He tells them to commune with their hearts upon their beds. And then to be still. And so he might be dealing, I'm just going to use my imagination. I'm not saying this is what it is. Let's say he has a child that has kept him up at night. And he's saying, you got a problem. You need to fix it, make sure you're not in the wrong. and you get a hold of your heart, to commune with your heart that bears a sense of almost command verbally, but we also know that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked, right? And if there's a problem, it's most likely coming out of the heart of man. So what he's saying is kind of get a hold of your heart, and you need to make sure that your heart's right, and you need to be still. And to be still just means to be silent, to be at peace. Okay? Don't sin, but you need to make sure your heart's right. Make sure your heart's right. Be at peace. Really don't war against God. And then you make sure you're replacing what is wrong or what possibly could be wrong with that righteousness, with that service to God, with that offering. We know that in the New Testament it says to present yourself a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. And I'm not saying that is what he's talking about, because that's the New Testament, but it can bear the same meaning behind it. That you are to offer a sacrifice of righteousness. And if he is dealing with actual idolatry, then that does mean making sacrifices to God. Make sure you are right with God. Make sure your heart is right. Make sure you're not going against God. Replace it with something that's right. And then he says, put your trust in the Lord. Now, if there's a problem of fear with somebody he knows, or they're going through a hard time, or maybe the people in the kingdom are going through a hard time, maybe some people he knows are going through idolatry, what he's just saying is fall back to God. You know, many times in my life, I know I've done wrong. There's a problem that needs to be addressed. And I don't just stop with, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Right? I'm not just going to continue on doing what I'm doing. There needs to be movement forward towards Christ. We're trying to continually be like Christ. And so, I know that if I'm in sin or I'm doing something contrary to God, I do need to not just stop it, I do need to check my heart, make sure my heart's right, and then I need to do something right for God. I don't just stop at not doing wrong. I need to make sure I am serving God because I'm placing my trust in Him. And if I'm not walking with Christ, and if I'm sinning against Christ, there's going to become chastisement, and we know that the Lord will chasten His children. And the Lord doesn't do right by evil. Yes, it rains on the just and the unjust, but He doesn't reward evil with good. And so if I have sinned, I do need to make sure that I am right with God, because He says to trust in the Lord. Our whole center is around Christ. And we're always trying to trust the Lord with everything. Right? And so we're placing that trust in Christ, and if I am wrong, and if I'm in the wrong, or I'm not, I should say, right with God, then why would I expect God to bless me for it? Right? I'm just forgetting my notes. That's all right. Anyways. So, he says to put your trust in the Lord. And then in verse 6, he says, there be many that say, who will show us any good? And then he's going to fall around and he doesn't even answer that question. He's already kind of in, I know it's a song, it's not an actual conversation, but he's dealing as if it kind of is. And he turns around from talking to the sons of men, and he turns around straight to God and says, Lord, show us the light of your countenance. And so he kind of is answering that question, but not straight to the point. Who is going to do right by us? Who is going to do good to us? Well, Lord, you show us the light of your countenance. And he kind of gives that illustration when he says trust in the Lord. And then he says, well, some may say this. Well, this is trusting in the Lord. Right? Now has put gladness in my heart more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. So, again, I like to dig deep into the scripture, but I don't like to dig too deep. So we really don't know the mind frame that he's going with. Particularly, we know that the Lord is providing joy and happiness to him. He's receiving joy of the Lord. And really, we can receive joy from the Lord in any time of our life, even through trials. And boy, this is the time right now as we're going through this COVID thing and everything that's happening. I don't care really what you believe about COVID. There are things that we're going through due to COVID. Right? And there is joy that needs to come of it. And what he says is, I have more joy right now than the time that they had their corn and their wine increase. And whether he's talking in contrary, like I have more joy than they do, or whether it's more of a time frame, I have more joy now than when I did back when their wine, he could be talking about his kingdom. His kingdom may have prospered, and we know it had. He could be talking about his enemies. I have more joy than my enemies had, or have, even when they were being richly blessed, or whenever they had prosperity. I have more joy, maybe in this instance when he's facing this problem or dealing with this problem than they had back then. Whatever instance it may be, we do know that he is finding the joy in the Lord. We really don't know, we don't really need to know what instance he's talking about, other than he is finding that joy in God and God alone. He's not relying upon the circumstances around him. Right? And then he says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. So we see him mentioned earlier about communing with your own heart upon your bed. And that's kind of, these two instances are kind of what gives me the idea that he might either be getting ready to go to bed or sometime around that time frame. Mainly because he ends with, he is going to trust in the Lord in this instance. And he is going to lay his head down, and he's going to sleep in peace. He's going to be still upon his bed. He's not going to worry. The Lord has provided him joy, and he is trusting in the Lord for deliverance. And right now I think of I mentioned COVID, and I don't know, maybe it's hard for me. I just don't like this time that we're going through right now. I really don't like being limited on what I can do. I am a rebel. I just kind of like doing things. And when somebody tells me I can't, that makes me want to do it even more. I got caught going into a store without a mask on. And then they handed me a mask. And there's a sign that says, no entry without a mask. And I still just wanted to go into the store without the mask. I really just wanted to run by the greeter guy, whatever you call him. He handed me the mask with tongs. Here you go. Right? I just so badly did not want to. Right. And so this time that we're going through is not going good with me. I don't like it. Right? But the Lord has really kind of convicted me in this instance where I just kind of need to trust in him. It doesn't matter the problem I'm going through. It doesn't matter really where I'm at. It doesn't matter what problem it is. But what it boils down to is there may be a problem, but I need to There's something in the past that he's done for me. There's something in the past that he's done for you. You might be able to think back to a time, maybe you have it written down. There might be an instance, maybe some of you have gone through cancer or something, a financial problem. It doesn't matter what it was. You can look back just like David did, and he said, the Lord did this for me.
Amen.
And then you need to make sure that you are not in the wrong, whether you are or not. I'm not saying that instances do cause the like, as far as sins cause the problem. We do know that sometimes it does, but generally it's just life, right? So if there's a problem, remember something that God did for you. Make sure that there is nothing that's standing between you and God. And then make sure that the relationship between you and God is good. Not that you don't want to be lukewarm. The Bible talks about being spit out if you're lukewarm. You don't want to just stop doing bad. You want to do something good. So remember the past that God has done. Remove maybe that thing that's wicked, if there's anything, which we assume there are, typically.
Yeah.
But then make sure that the relationship with God is right. And then you need to rely on God, no matter what the instance is. I know that's hard for me to do. I know it can be hard. Things are easy to say and hard to do. But that's something the Lord has really been working in my life. It doesn't matter what the problem is. Just remember. Remove. Renew. I don't know. Ours. You know. And then rely.
Good job.
There we go, 4 points. I did it. Anyway. So let's go to the Lord in prayer, and while I pray, I'd really like maybe for you to think of something the Lord's done in your past. You might be going through a problem right now, and what you really need to do is just remember something the Lord has done. Thank Him for it. And then make sure you're right with God, serving Him, and then relying on Him. So I'll pray, and then Pastor will come back. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you for even the time that we're going in, Lord. You're growing us, you're growing our faith, you're growing our patience, dear God. I thank you for the message, and it may not be the best message out there, Lord God. It very possibly could be the worst, but as long as you gave it to me, God, I'm very grateful for it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to present it before the people, dear God. I pray that you continue working my heart. Make sure, dear God, that I'm relying upon you and continue to be